Right, so today we're going deep on Simone Weil.
Oh, yeah. She's a fascinating figure for sure.
Definitely, I mean, just her life alone, activist, pacifist,
Then a militant, right.
exactly. And then you throw in the mystic, the exile.
A real whirlwind, but at the heart of it, always a philosopher.
Absolutely searching for truth, for justice.
Yeah.
It never really let her go.
And that's what makes her so interesting to unpack for you. I mean, she's not easily categorized.
Not at all.
Her work, it's full of these like deliberate contradictions, you know?
Oh, yes.
Deeply value-driven, but never quite systematized.
You could have her, giving this incredibly detailed account of factory life.
Right next to some, profound reflection on what even is political power.
It's wild, and because of that, I feel like people's interpretations of Weil
Oh, tell me about it.
often say more about them than about her.
It's true. You look at how different thinkers have seen her, it's a real spectrum.
Like Camus, for example.
He saw her as like a prototype for his whole concept of the revoltés, those who rebel against injustice.
And then Agamben calling her conscience the most lucid of our times.
High praise indeed.
Art was so impressed by her view on labor, the meaning of it.
Blanchot, too, he saw her as this exceptional figure, almost providing this like example of certitude.
And even Murdoch picked up on that rigorous thinking, that discipline behind her writing.
And then you have de Gaulle just straight up calling her crazy for that battlefield nurse idea.
Oh, yeah, that's a classic.
So you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Real range of responses.
It's amazing. And, as we try to get into her thought, it's important for you to know
Oh, absolutely.
that once herself, she was very concerned with this, that her life not eclipse her actual thinking.
Right, that the subtleties get lost.
Exactly. So in this deep dive, let's really try to focus on those core concepts.
Sounds good to me.
So for you, we're going to look at 5 key areas of her philosophy.
Okay, lay it on me.
Think of them as like containers for her ideas.
Right.
First up, social and political philosophy.
I have one.
Then epistemology, how she approached knowing itself, ethics, right and wrong, all that.
Sure.
Then her metaphysical and religious philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
how she understood reality, the divine.
I'm following you.
And finally, aesthetics, beauty, art.
Interesting. All right, so these are like categories.
Right. And she herself wasn't big on systems.
No, she wasn't.
So they're a bit artificial. But I think they'll help us for you to really see the breadth of her work.
Makes sense.
And we'll also touch on, how she's been received in continental philosophy.
Yeah.
Anglo-American thought, too.
All right, so let's jump in with the social and political philosophy.
Yeah, let's do it. It seems like it evolved a lot over her life.
Oh, it definitely did. For you, a good place to start is her early period, let's say 1925 to 1934.
Okay, so early Weil.
Yeah, and here you really see the influence of her teachers.
Who were those again?
Well, there's René Lessen.
Mm.
He introduced her to this idea that contradiction, it wasn't a dead end, but actually a starting point for deeper thinking.
Interesting.
And then there was Elaine.
Yeah, he was important for her, right?
Hugely influential for her understanding of intellectual history. And he really fostered her critique of French society.
Nice.
Many scholars place her in this Alain Lagneau line of thought. It's voluntarist spiritualist.
Okay, break that down for you.
Sure. So it really emphasizes the power of individual will
Okay.
and this kind of inner spiritual understanding.
I see.
Both of those are key to knowledge and action.
So it really fits with her focus on individual experience and ethics.
Exactly.
And early on, she was already engaging with, some big names in philosophy,
Oh, yeah. She was grappling with the heavy hitters.
like Descartes.
That first-person perspective, right? The skepticism.
And then Marx.
His analysis of class, of course, and the
Yeah.
materialist view of history.
And even Kant, with his emphasis on moral absolutes.
And the inherent dignity of each person.
It sounds like she was trying to forge her own path, but really wrestling with these giants.
He was definitely no stranger to challenging established ideas.
And her goal at this point, as I understand it for you, was to really try to understand the root causes of oppression in society.
That's right. And from that understanding, she wanted to pave the way towards greater liberty.
So not just critique, but actual solutions.
Always with an eye towards action.
And that desire to understand oppression, it led her to seek out direct experience.
She wasn't content to just theorize.
Like her trip to Germany in 1932.
Yeah, what a time to be there, right?
Right on the verge of Nazism.
Exactly. And she got to see firsthand the conditions that could allow something like that to take root.
What did she observe?
Well, she was struck by the reformist nature of the German trade unions,
Okay.
And she was really troubled by the effects of long-term unemployment on people.
Yeah, I can imagine that takes a toll.
Oh, absolutely. Their sense of purpose, their self-worth, it was all eroded.
And even this early on, she was already critiquing bureaucracy.
1933, she's writing about this.
Wow.
So for you, the takeaway here is she saw how easily bureaucracy elevates management. And that kind of abstract, intellectualized thinking over the individual worker, especially their actual experience of physical labor.
So it's not just about ideas, it's about the lived reality of work.
Precisely. And she was adamant that workers should have a deep understanding of their role in the whole system.
Not just be cogs in a machine.
Exactly. She wanted them to see their contribution.
It all culminates in that 1934 essay, right?
Reflections concerning the causes of liberty and social oppression.
A mouthful.
I know, but super important for understanding her early thought.
What are the key points for you?
Well, she's using a Marxian method of analysis here.
Okay, so still influenced by Marx.
Oh, yeah, but always with her own unique perspective.
So what's unique?
Her focus is laser sharp on the lived experiences of the oppressed.
Right, not just theory.
Exactly. And she has this scathing critique of the detached intellectual,
You know the type.
all head, no hands.
Yeah, exactly. She wants a much more grounded approach,
And she places a high value on manual labor.
which is interesting coming from someone with her background.
Right.
Yeah.
Like she really believed in the dignity of physical work.
And then there's that call for rigorous individual thinking.
Yes, she's not about easy collective slogans.
What does she want instead?
She wants precise intellectual engagement and action.
Bridging that gap between theory and practice.
Exactly. She even later noted that for her, all of philosophy, even how we understand knowledge itself,
Okay.
it's all about action and practical engagement with the world.
So no ivory tower philosophy for her.
Not a chance.
And we get to that really intense period of factory work.
Yeah, 1934 to 1935.
She wasn't playing around. She really immersed herself.
Oh, this was a turning point for her, for sure.
Not just for her political views, but also for her spiritual understanding, right?
Absolutely. The factory floor, it gave her this firsthand experience of what she called the normalization of brutality.
That's heavy.
It was the pace, the directives, it all just created this immense weight.
And what hit her hardest?
This is key for you. It wasn't just the physical hardship.
Okay.
It was the dehumanization she felt reduced.
Like a cog in that machine she was talking about.
Exactly the humiliation of it all. And what's fascinating is it didn't automatically lead to rebellion.
Really?
Nope. Instead, she saw fatigue, docility, acceptance.
Wow.
She even used the term slavery to describe it.
Strong words.
And then you have that pivotal moment in Portugal in 1935.
The religious procession, right?
Yeah, her first real encounter with Christianity, and she suddenly felt this conviction that it was preeminently the religion of slaves.
I could see how that would resonate with her experience.
Absolutely, and this is also when you see a shift in her language.
How so?
She moves away from oppression, this purely political term, towards these much deeper concepts, humiliation and affliction.
Getting more spiritual, more existential.
Exactly. Her philosophical lens is widening.
So let's move into her middle period then.
Okay, 1935 to 1939.
She's still engaged with social and political issues?
Oh, yeah. She even participated in those Paris factory occupations in 1936.
Right, but it seems like her focus starts to shift a bit.
It does. She's moving more towards the possibility of reform.
Reform instead of revolution.
Exactly. Advocating for greater equality, more collaboration within the existing systems.
So less about tearing it all down and more about working within the system to improve it.
That's the gist of it.
And her stance on the Spanish Civil War that really shows this nuanced approach.
It does. She was firmly against fascism.
Of course.
But she favored French non-intervention.
Which put her at odds with many others on the left.
Especially the communists at the time.
So what was her reasoning for you?
She saw war itself as a surrender to power and prestige.
Okay, so not a pacifist, but very wary of war.
Exactly. And those concepts of power and prestige, they really solidify during this period.
Especially in that essay, Let Us Not Start Another Trojan War.
Or The Power of Words, as it's sometimes called.
Really insightful stuff in there.
Yeah, this is where she lays out some of her key ideas about political discourse.
Like what?
Well, for you, she argues that the devastation of war, it's often completely disproportionate to the reasons given for starting it.
Makes you think.
And she says wars often lack clear objectives.
Yeah, I can see that.
And ideologies, they become these empty symbols like the Helen of Troy.
A pretext for violence.
Exactly. She identifies power as relying heavily on this illusion of prestige.
And prestige being insatiable, right?
Always wanting more, never enough.
So what's the solution for you?
She urges us to make a clear distinction between the real and the imaginary.
Okay, that seems crucial.
And she really emphasizes the importance of precise language.
For what purpose?
To critically examine those dangerous ideologies, she thought clarity of thought could actually prevent violence.
Wow. So language is a tool for peace, almost.
Exactly.
She was also influenced by that idea of a dynamic equilibrium, right?
Yeah, Heraclitus, that balance of opposing forces.
And for you, the important thing is she distinguishes between worthwhile conflict.
Like the struggle for social justice and the destructive illusions fueled by that pursuit of prestige.
Which often leads to war.
Exactly.
And then there's that 1937 piece, Note on Social Democracy.
Oh yeah, where she defines politics for you.
How does she see it?
As this constant tension between the real social conditions and the collective imagination.
Okay.
Which is often, beside the point or head of it or behind it.
Never quite in sync with reality.
Exactly.
So then we enter her late period.
1939 to 1943, a very different world.
World War II casts a long shadow over everything.
It does, and her thinking takes on this much darker tone.
Yet somehow even more insightful.
Maybe because of the darkness she was facing.
And the Iliad, or the poem of force, that's a central text from this time.
It really is. For you, it's a stark analysis of human conflict written right after the fall of France.
Under a pseudonym too, right?
Yeah, to avoid the censorship, the anti-Semitism.
So what's the core concept for you?
Force. She puts it right at the center of all human interactions.
Okay.
And she argues that force, it doesn't matter if you wield it or suffer it. It reifies and dehumanizes everyone it touches.
Both the victim and the perpetrator.
Exactly.
And it's not just about physical coercion, right?
This is key for you. It includes that social element of prestige.
Right back to that.
And she shows how force shapes individuals through social values.
How we internalize those power dynamics.
Exactly. And how it can destroy entire cultures.
Like she saw with French colonialism.
Yeah, brutal example.
So for Weil, it's not class or Hegel's Geist that drives history.
Nope. It's this relentless, often unseen force, the force that kills or that does not kill just yet.
Chilling.
It is, and it's a significant development beyond thinkers like Hobbes and Hegel.
Offering a really profound analysis of enslavement.
Physical and social?
And during her time with the Free French in London.
Yes, when she was working for them.
Her ideas about labor and justice, they get even more complex.
They do, and they become much more intertwined with her Christianity.
You see a shift here for you, a greater emphasis on the social and the spiritual.
Right. A little less focus on the individual and the secular.
So what does that look like in her work?
Well, she starts to critique the concept of rights.
Interesting. Why would she do that?
Because she sees them as ultimately reliant on force to be effective.
Okay, I see.
And instead, she proposes obligation and justice as more fundamental ethical concepts.
So it's not about what we're entitled to, but what we owe each other.
Exactly.
And this is all laid out in human personality, right?
Yes. One of her key essays from this period.
And she makes this crucial distinction between two types of justice.
Natural and supernatural.
Okay, break that down for you.
So natural justice is social contingent on human agreements.
Okay.
Whereas supernatural justice is impersonal, eternal, rooted in a divine order.
So two very different ways of understanding justice.
And all of this leads to her major work from this late period.
The Need for Roots.
Such a powerful title.
It is. And for you, she introduces this vital concept, the needs of the soul.
As a counterbalance to the idea of rights.
So it's not just about legal frameworks or political systems.
No, it's much deeper than that.
So what are these needs of the soul for you?
Well, her moral framework here, it's deeply rooted in compassion. And she believes our obligations to each other, they become clear through attentive observation.
Especially towards those who are suffering.
Exactly, those who are at risk of affliction.
And all of this points towards her understanding of supernatural justice.
Yes, she argues that the basis of this higher justice, it's not just human rationality.
Interesting. What is it then?
It's a fundamental desire for the good.
A desire that she believed resides in every human being.
Exactly, a universal longing.
And this is important for you. She wasn't just advocating for universal law in a Kantian sense.
No, she wasn't trying to impose a single system on everyone.
So what was she aiming for?
She wanted different cultures to keep their unique traditions.
Okay.
But for individuals within those cultures to orient themselves towards those deeper, more universal values.
So it's about a shift in perspective.
Exactly, a reorientation towards the good.
And the concept of roots itself, l'enracinement.
It's so central to her thinking.
It really is. And for you, it captures this idea that while society is constantly changing,
Always in flux.
we also need stability, belonging, security.
We need those roots to flourish.
And she saw these roots as a bridge between our social reality
Yeah, the everyday world.
and that transcendent ideal of supernatural justice.
A connection between the here and now and the eternal.
So how do these roots actually manifest for you?
They manifest through our connections to community,
Good.
to a specific place, our links to the past and the future,
Our history and our hopes?
and even our shared subjection to the material conditions that shape our lives.
So it's about acknowledging those shared realities.
Exactly.
And she believed that a strong sense of rootedness, it paradoxically allows for individual growth.
And it fosters what she called a new patriotism.
What did she mean by that?
Not the kind of patriotism based on blind allegiance,
Yeah.
but one grounded in compassion and concern for everyone.
A more universal kind of love for one's community.
Precisely.
And she identified some powerful uprooting forces at work in the modern world.
Oh, yeah, those forces that tear us away from our roots.
Like what for you?
She was very critical of money,
Okay.
with its abstract and destabilizing influence.
Yeah. It can definitely be a disruptive force.
And she saw contemporary education as another major culprit.
Really? How so?
She felt it was too focused on diplomas as a means to an end.
Just getting a job?
Exactly. And she thought it was fostering this idolatry of self.
Through a kind of narrow nationalism.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
Roman patriotism, she saw it as flawed and dangerous.
So what was her alternative vision?
A civilization built on free labor,
Okay.
on a conscious consent to the necessary forces in the world.
So working with nature, not against it.
Precisely. And for her labor, especially physical labor,
Uh-huh.
it wasn't just an economic activity. It
Right.
was the spiritual core of a just society.
So a deep respect for work and its transformative potential.
Exactly. She even suggested that a spiritual revolution, a change in our values,
Okay.
it was more important than economic restructuring.
So changing our hearts, not just our systems.
And she saw labor as this mediator between the natural and the supernatural.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more about that.
Well, she believed that our consent to the necessities of nature,
Uh-huh.
it was a form of consent to the divine will.
Like an imitatio Christi.
Exactly, a following in the footsteps of Christ.
And for you, this is a shift from her earlier emphasis on the individual.
It is, she starts to see the importance of social context.
Of finding meaning within a community.
Exactly, and she embraces this idea of a new patriotism.
One rooted in compassion and spirituality.
Exactly.
So now let's dive into her epistemology.
Okay, her theory of knowledge.
This was central to her thinking throughout her life.
Oh, she was constantly wrestling with these questions.
And she really emphasized rigorous and balanced thinking.
Even when it led to incredibly difficult intellectual challenges.
She was a fearless thinker.
Definitely. I mean, she famously tried to reconcile Catholic doctrine with insights from all these different traditions, philosophical and spiritual.
So she wasn't afraid of complexity.
No, she embraced it.
And she believed that true knowledge, it was often forged in the crucible of suffering.
Echoing Aeschylus there.
Exactly. And it's important for you to know that her epistemology, it wasn't static.
It evolved constantly right along with her other ideas.
Her social and political thought, her religious beliefs, all of it.
It was all interconnected.
So where do we start with her epistemology?
Well, her early work, her dissertation, even it shows this deep engagement with Descartes.
So those foundational questions of knowledge.
Yeah, like how do we know anything for sure?
And she agreed with Descartes on some key points.
The existence of the self, God, the external world.
Okay, so those were givens for her.
But her take on the cogito, I think, therefore I am,
Right.
she tweaks it in a fascinating way.
Oh, so?
For her, it becomes I can, therefore I am, je puis donc je suis.
Interesting. So it's not just about thinking, but about our capacity to act.
Exactly. She's emphasizing the active freedom of the self.
But she clarifies that right away, doesn't she?
Absolutely. She immediately points out that recognizing God's power, that's what allows us to see our own limitations.
So we're free, but within limits.
Exactly.
And so for her genuine self-knowledge,
It's about understanding our capabilities, but also recognizing that we're not God.
humility is key.
Always, and even in her early teaching, she was already skeptical of sensation.
As a foundation for knowledge.
Exactly, a critique of empiricism.
So she wasn't on board with that whole seeing is believing thing.
Nope, she thought it was much more complicated than that.
And then there's that famous suspicion of the imagination.
Oh yeah, that falla imagination, the mad imagination.
She really saw it as a barrier to true knowledge.
A distorting lens.
So for you, she's aligned with Kant and Plato here,
Exactly, those who were wary of the purely sensory and imaginative.
as opposed to Aristotle, who was more empirical.
Right, she thought our sensations, they tend to unconsciously universalize our interpretations.
So we project our own limited perspective onto the world.
Exactly, and then the imagination comes along and amplifies that.
By filtering everything through our own biases and desires.
Without us even realizing it.
So it's a recipe for distortion.
And this led her to develop a really interesting epistemology for you.
Tell me more.
It's intersubjective.
Okay, meaning?
Meaning that for Weil knowledge, it's not about aggressively asserting our own perspective.
So it's not about winning an argument or proving we're right?
Nope, it's about suspending our own point of view.
Really?
Yeah, stepping back and letting reality, including other people's perspective, letting it all appear to us on its own terms.
That requires a lot of humility.
It does a real practice of epistemic humility.
And what else does it require for you?
Openness to different ideas.
Okay,
A careful and qualified use of language.
so not just throwing around big words.
No, being precise, recognizing the limits of our expression.
And a constant willingness to question our own assumptions.
Exactly, because we're limited knowers.
We don't have all the answers.
Not even close.
Her understanding of contradiction that evolved in a fascinating way too.
It did. For her, contradiction wasn't a dead end, but a starting point for deeper thinking.
So it forces us to expand our frameworks.
Exactly. She even drew on the work of Eudoxus.
A mathematician.
Yeah, to suggest that seemingly incompatible things, they can be reconciled on a higher plane of understanding.
It's not about resolving the contradiction.
No, it's about seeing it from a different perspective.
Gaining a more holistic view.
Precisely.
And for you, this wasn't a Hegelian synthesis.
No, not a neat resolution through logic.
So what was it then?
For while contemplation of these contradictions, it could lead to a deeper intuition of truth.
Truth, not as an object, but as a mystery.
Exactly, something we can approach but never fully grasp.
And in her later work, mystery itself becomes a category.
It does a specific kind of contradiction where things are linked in a way that transcends our understanding.
And this has clear theological implications, right?
Absolutely. It helps us make sense of seemingly paradoxical ideas. Like the coexistence of suffering and a benevolent God.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Or the figure of Christ embodying both the divine and the human.
Two natures in one person.
A profound mystery.
And she saw mathematics as a bridge between the natural and the eternal.
Following that ancient Pythagorean tradition.
So the study of math as a kind of purification.
Exactly, a way of training the mind.
So instead of trying to eliminate contradictions.
She embraced them.
Really?
Oh, yeah. She thought we should present them honestly and test them rigorously.
Like a scientist, almost.
In a way, yes. She called them a criterion of the real.
A way of gauging what's true.
Exactly, and they demand intellectual detachment and honesty.
Can you give an example?
Sure, the idea of love your enemies.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a tough one.
It's a contradiction to our natural impulses.
But she saw it as something to be wrestled with.
Exactly, because when we embrace that contradiction, it can loosen our attachment.
To help us see things from a new perspective.
And lead to a more nuanced and inclusive understanding of the world.
And she had that famous quote, an attachment to a particular thing can only be destroyed by an attachment which is incompatible with it.
Powerful stuff.
It is, and her understanding of contradiction, it was more Pythagorean and Platonic than Marxian.
Definitely she saw dialectics as operating on the level of thought with mystery as both the starting point and the ultimate horizon.
So it's not about arriving at a final answer.
No, it's about the journey, the ongoing exploration.
And she criticized Marx for trying to combine that dialectical movement towards the good.
With a purely materialist worldview.
Which she saw as limiting.
Exactly. She thought there was something transcendent driving that movement.
And then there's that key concept of reading lecture.
This one is crucial for you.
Because it's not just about reading words on a page.
No, it's about how we interpret our experiences.
Both physical sensations and social conditions.
Exactly. It's about meaning making.
And she saw all interpretation as mediated.
Influenced by a whole web of other people's readings.
So we're always in conversation with others, even when we're alone with our thoughts.
That's right. And she uses that metaphor of the blind man's stick.
From Descartes.
Yes, just like the blind man uses his stick to understand his surroundings.
We rely on the perspectives of others to expand our own understanding.
But for you, it's important to remember that our readings can be distorted.
By what?
Well, by things like violence,
Okay.
which can make us see threats everywhere.
So our interpretations are shaped by our experiences.
Absolutely, and crucially, those readings, they're never neutral.
What do you mean?
They're shaped by power dynamics, by social forces.
Right back to that concept of source.
Exactly. She even said war is a way of imposing another reading of sensations.
So powerful.
And more broadly, all action on others essentially consists in changing what they read.
So we're constantly trying to influence each other's interpretations.
In a way, yes.
And she connects this idea of reading to the nature of appearance.
To the empirical world and the contradictions within it.
So how does that work for you?
Well, she sees the world as made up of meanings that we read.
Okay.
And those meanings, even though they're interpretations, they can feel external.
Like they're imposed on us.
Exactly. And she thinks it's crucial for you to contemplate those profound contradictions.
The ones that draw us upwards, as Plato said.
Yes, those are the ones that really matter.
And we're not passive in this process of reading, are we?
No. We have the capacity to change our interpretations.
But that deeper transformation, it requires a kind of apprenticeship.
It does. We have to learn to see the world in a new way.
And for her, that means learning to love the divine through the things of the world.
Cultivating attentiveness through our bodily experiences.
So it's not just an intellectual exercise.
No, it's about engaging with the world with our whole being.
And she believed that different ways of living lead to different readings.
Of course, our experiences shape our interpretation.
And her ideal vision was to see the natural world illuminated by the supernatural.
To see the divine shining through the everyday.
And that involves a kind of hierarchical understanding.
Yes, she talks about recognizing the necessity behind our sensations, then the order behind that necessity, and ultimately the divine presence behind that order.
So it's a process of deepening our understanding.
Exactly.
And she famously said that loving all facts is a way of reading God in them.
Beautiful, isn't it?
It is. She saw the world as this rich text with multiple layers of meaning.
Full of hidden depths waiting to be uncovered.
And this informs her critique of modern science in the need for roots.
Oh yeah, she had a very particular view of science.
What was it for you?
Well, she advocated for scientific inquiry that was grounded in math.
Okay, so rigor and precision are important.
Absolutely. But she thought it should be linked to faith as well.
So a kind of integrated approach.
Exactly. She believed that this would allow us to read the world on multiple levels.
What were those levels?
Eternal wisdom, perfect obedience, beauty, balance of relations, and even brute force.
Wow, a lot to unpack there.
There is, and for you, this is a very anti-modern stance.
In what way?
Well, she saw modern science as a project of self.